Hi, and welcome to the Grind Academy podcast. My name is Rob Patterson, and I'm a former CEO who traded the comfort of that life in to create this podcast. The Grind Academy podcast has one main purpose: to be a platform for sharing experiences, practical life skills not taught at school. Growing up, my parents chose to serve their lives as youth missionaries. This meant relocating several times and having to repeatedly find my place in new towns. I often faced difficult situations at home from troubled youths, and I struggled to fit in at new schools. My academic grades suffered, and despite securing a place at hotel school, I struggled to focus and eventually dropped out. Still, I made it to a high-profile CEO role for one of Britain's largest hotel chains, and today I own several successful businesses. It was practical life skills, learning to dream limitlessly, and consistent grind that guided me on my journey. That's why each week I'm introducing some of the most inspiring and talented minds from sport, business, literature, and science. I want to share their stories as practical life lessons you can learn from and apply to your own situation. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Now let's meet today's special guest. Alison Pena, thanks for joining the Grind Academy podcast today. Welcome to the show. Alison, I wanted to start with a little bit of context. Could you perhaps share with us what led you to write your book, The Bad Widow Guide to Life After Loss?
My husband and I were together for almost 25 years, and we missed our 20th wedding anniversary by 3 weeks. In October of 2015, he was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And we basically fought for his life for the next 11 months. And then he died in my arms at home on September 10th, 2016. And I was a widow. I had no idea what a widow was. I discovered that nobody around me, even though they loved me, they had no idea how to deal with me. And I felt broken. The thing that you do with broken things is you try and fix them. And so I wrote The Bad Widow Guide to Life After Loss because at a certain point I realized I wasn't actually broken. I was heartbroken. And that was a very different thing. From broken, you can't actually come back from broken. Broken is Humpty Dumpty. It's patch yourself together, have people patching you together. And it does not feel good to be that person. And so Bad Widow started out because I decided, I sort of took a stand that I was not broken and that I didn't need to be fixed. But I also realized that because we don't talk about grief and what it is really to grieve, nobody knows what to do. Not the person grieving and not the people who care about them. And I decided to fix that, to set the record straight, to actually tell the truth of my own experience.
So after 20 years or just short of 20 years of marriage and losing your husband, and I guess having the chance to build up to that, but still at that moment of loss, we wake up the next day. What do you do? Where do you start? You've still got to go to work. I mean, you've got a bit of time off, presumably, but how do you begin to start to think about life again after 20 years of marriage and losing your husband?
It was literally lie in bed and think of a reason to be alive that day before I put my feet on the floor. Because there was that moment between being awake and being asleep where I could feel the warmth of him at my back. And then I would wake up and that remembering that he was dead would crash over me. And I would feel that just devastating grief again every day. So it was necessary for me to think of something that would delight me that day, whether it was go outside, call a friend. In that time, it had to be tiny stuff because I was only capable of tiny stuff.
Yeah.
And it was overwhelming because my husband was an artist And so I was left an apartment and his studio on Union Square with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of paintings.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And I guess that acted as a constant reminder. You couldn't really just block it out. You have to deal with it, right? What's in front of you.
Yeah, I mean, with one income instead of two incomes, I had to close the studio. But smell is the most visceral of senses. So smell is the thing that's going to hit you hardest. And so I would go into the studio and I had to get rid of stuff at a time when getting rid of anything felt like betrayal. Letting go of stuff is really hard when someone dies, but usually it's shoes and shirts.
Yeah.
This was his lifetime legacy of work. Right now, I have in my apartment 546 paintings, wow, which came out of a 500 square foot studio into about an 800 square foot apartment.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was a lot. And every time I walked in there and smelled the oil paint, I cried for 11 months.
Wow. Wow. That's, I mean, I don't even know where to start. You titled the book "The Bad Widow and a Guide to Life After Love or After Loss," a loss of love. What led you? I mean, describe why you used the term "bad widow."
Bad widow. A good widow goes along. So very often what people say, you'll ask someone who's grieving, "How are you?" And they'll say, "I'm fine." They're not actually fine. They're just tired of explaining what it's actually like. And so they say they're fine. And what I realized was that if I said I was fine, people couldn't do it better. And so Bad Widow was about taking a contrarian view, actually telling the truth. For example, people would say, "How are you?" And the thought in my head was, well, I just lost the man I love for almost half my lifetime. How do you think I am?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, not to joke around about it, but that was really what I was thinking. And I realized that I couldn't answer, "How are you?" because we had this future that we had dreamed of and created, and that was gone. Never would come back. And I could not see a horizon for myself that was past this devastating grief. So what I started to say was, I can't answer "How are you?" but I can answer, "How are you today?" or "How are you this week?" So I discovered that I could answer that if they gave me a shorter time horizon, because I could see for a week, or I could see for a day, or I could see for a minute. And that turned out to be really helpful for the people who wanted to provide me with support.
Was that
to
something,
be that specific?
Was that something that you took initiative and said to people around you, "Look, Pete, I need a time frame on this"? Did you tell them that, or how do you convey that message?
Yeah, Bad Widow was about actually speaking out what was true.
Yeah.
And so when they were doing things or saying things that were not particularly helpful, giving them a reframe, a better way to do it. Because they wanted to help. They just had no idea what to do. And what happens very often is people are grieving, they lose people from their lives because either they burst into tears. The other thing a grieving person hears a lot is, "I didn't mean to make you cry." And my internal conversation was, "I have bigger problems than you."
Yeah.
Which obviously you can't say because it's kindly meant.
Yeah.
But there does need to be a way to address tears.
So what's your advice if we're asking, if somebody's asking a question, is someone grieving, "How are you today?" And you break down and cry, what's the best advice for the person that's trying to support, or because they have got the best intentions?
They do. I mean, the thing that was so clear to me was the kindness of people, that people really were doing their best to care. And they just kept doing it wrong because it's not a conversation we're open about what you do. So my recommendation for the person who is in the face of someone who bursts into tears is to ask what's needed. I'm not sure what to do. What would be helpful to you? I'm glad to just let you be, or give you a hug, or talk about the person you lost. Tell stories.
But that's got to be a decision of the grieving person, right? So that's, I guess, why you're saying ask that question.
Ask that question, because there's nothing wrong with saying you don't know. The problem is that people think that they should know.
Mm-hmm.
Except unless, if you haven't been through it, you don't.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually actively irritating for people to make up what they think they should be doing rather than asking. Can I tell the other side of that? So if a person is grieving and they are tending to burst into tears at random awkward times, you can plan that out. So if you know that you're going to a gathering, like a family gathering, a holiday party or something, and you're not sure how you're going to be, think about what you would like to have happen. I would like permission to just leave the table. And maybe you call the host and you say, hey, I'm okay. What people want to know is that you're okay. You're not irrevocably broken. You will be able to come back, but here are some things that are helpful. If you give people guidance, they are so happy not to fix you, and they are so happy to know what to do.
Yeah. The book quite cleverly has action sections at the end of each chapter, and I think you've called out a couple of those already. You mentioned in the book that there were some people that show up and want to help, and there are other people that disappear, and there are different reactions to a friend who's lost somebody. What can you explain or elaborate on people didn't show up, or people are just afraid to talk? What drives those emotions?
I think people are afraid of getting it wrong. So what I discovered was that if I wasn't really specific about what I needed, mm-hmm. nobody would do anything because they didn't want to screw it up. And it's completely understandable. They wanted to give me what I needed, but I had to be specific and I had to be clear. It's like they talk about that story, they do those experiments where someone's lying on the ground and looks like they're being beaten up, and they go, help. And nobody helps because they think somebody else is going to. It's kind of like that. When I would ask specifically for what I needed, I got it. Mm-hmm. Most of the time. Because if it was within their power, if it wasn't too much, they were delighted to give me what I needed. But figuring that out was really challenging because I wasn't the same person that I had been.
Human nature is that people want to do the right thing and want to help. It's just, as you say, exactly what is needed. If I can just go back a step to the moment after mm-hmm. your loss, and you were talking about just taking one day at a time and just getting out of bed and thinking the right thoughts. At what point did you start to think, okay, I need to think about this? Because you've thought about this very logically and you've stepped back from the situation, which is highly commendable. How long did it take to get to that point to be able to step back and say, right, I need to tell people what they need?
It was the thing that kept running through my head was this pain must serve. Mm-hmm. This can't just be awful. There must be a purpose behind this beyond being absolutely devastating. Breaking me open in a way that I could not have imagined. And so this pain must serve went through, but really it was encountering all these different kinds of breakdowns, really practical, clear breakdowns. I couldn't remember things from 1 second to the next. I might lose 10 minutes. I might lose an hour. It was really disconcerting because first I was this very capable, effective person, and then I wasn't. I couldn't focus. And my energy, I had no energy to reach out to people. So people would call me, and I think this is important. People would call me and I didn't have the energy to answer the phone or call them back. But it mattered that they called. It kind of kept me tethered to life that they called. Oh, okay, I still exist with people in my community, because it didn't always feel that way. So it started out as, okay, I'm creating nets for myself to get through the day, get through what I needed to do. Like I couldn't remember, I had about 5 seconds to get to the kitchen once I remembered I was hungry. And then I forgot. So I literally put baskets of power bars around the house so my eyes would see the power bars and go, oh, wow, yeah, you were hungry a little while ago. And I set up all kinds of things like that. I created rituals to move myself through. One of the things that's very strange is that time, it feels like you're out of time, because even as you're maybe going to work or seeing people, the biggest thing in your world is the loss. It's not the biggest thing in other people's worlds. So for them, it's a pebble. For you, it's a boulder.
Mm-hmm. Great analogy.
that you're going around. And you have, it's weird with grief. So what I discovered was that I had a year to grieve a man I'd been with for 25 years. And then I was meant to be bounced back and over it. Except year 2 was 0 to rage in about 5 seconds.
Why do you say 1 year? What if you think that's an outside expectation, or where does that come from?
It's the outside expectation. I know many, many widows who at the end of a year, nobody called to say, how are you today? Anymore. And there was some contact across that first year, but then at the end of that year, you're meant to be back in the swing of things. And that's just not how it is. There are other kinds of grief. So there's grief from divorce. There's grief from what's happening in the world in various ways. There's grief, all kinds of different kinds of grief. And we arbitrarily set an amount of time that you're allowed to grieve those things. Mm. Somebody loses a pet who may have been a member of the family for 15 years. There is grief there, but you're not actually, there's no space for that to be grief.
So the method that you've written about in your book, if you could talk about that first, let's say that first arbitrary 12 months, what would be your critical steps for getting through that first 12 months? What would be your advice on that?
The first thing is to sort of come back to yourself, come back to grounding yourself. One of the things that this does is it kind of blows up